Well, man, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, I guess whatever time it is that somebody's watching this. I have a special guest with me today, Mr. Brooks Powell. We have known each other for a long time now, probably 15 years at this point.
Feels like it, yeah.
It's incredible, which is amazing because your story continues to evolve, our story continues to evolve, and for these friendships that are made along the way in these professional lives, and then we get to reunite back 15 years ago, for 15 years from when we met, both running a business, and now with your new endeavor of going out on your own a couple years ago, and specifically wanted to just kind of ask you some questions. We've had a lot of questions offline with lunches and just getting together and building relationships on what it takes to open a business, what it takes to run a business, the mindset shift that comes from being a high-level, productive employee to now opening up your own contracting business. And this kind of came about with just from having these really cool conversations that I think would be really healthy and really productive for somebody else who's maybe looking to do that. And so the idea was to say, okay, cool, what if we took a moment to have these conversations online and did some exclusive content for the Be Extraordinary podcast community and turned on a camera. So so thanks for being on here.
The camera part's the part where you're like, okay, got to get comfortable with it.
Right.
It really started with 15 years ago. There's been a lot of great advice back and forth between us. Like you've been there. You've given me a lot of great advice. You've given me books to read. You've been really influential in my personal growth over the last 10, 15 years, and I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, man. It's easy, very, very similar in regards to ambition, very similar in regards to philosophies and principles and doing the right thing. So appreciate that very much, but it's been a pleasure. So, well, man, I wanted to kind of give you a plug real quick before we start. Tell us, kind of catch us up to speed with what you're currently doing, what you guys do as far as what you offer, and then I'd like to kind of unpeel or peel back the onion of and rewind back in time of how we got there. And then for those that are watching this, really talk about what are the do's, what are the don't do's, what have you learned in the process, what hurt a lot, and if you could give somebody some advice that was looking to go start a contracting business that they wouldn't do. And then ultimately kind of where you guys have landed in regards to some equilibrium that's allowing you to run a successful business. So, but real quick, tell us about what you guys do.
So we own a commercial air conditioning company that caters directly to business owners and property managers. And when I say the word commercial, it's a lot of commercial office space, it's industrial, and we're providing a lot of service and repair and maintenances to them. So it's asset management, it's just making sure that equipment is running at its tip-top condition and that we're protecting that financial asset for that owner, as well as helping the property manager provide reliable air conditioning to their tenants and whatnot.
Cool.
We generally avoid construction completely. Maybe 10% of our revenue comes from general contractors and comes from construction. Like 90% of it is direct to owner, commercial. And it makes it easier. Like I grew up in that space. I grew up, catering to property managers and catering to business owners and learning what's important to them and what's not. So it just became very natural for us to kind of, seek out those types of clients again.
Brooks, basically played at a very high level for some of the big guys in the area here in the Central Florida area. I would consider you a top 1% in regards to your craft. And what was that transition, and was that always something that was burning inside of you to open up your own business, or was that something that kind of became more of a thing as you got better in your craft? Talk to me about what was the fire, what ignited your want to go out on your own?
Yeah, it started from the very beginning. Like I started doing air conditioning while I was in college, and was not doing very well in college. Like I was at Valencia Community College here in Orlando and was kind of struggling through just some basic classes. Like my attention span wasn't there. I wasn't really engaged in it. So in 2001, I started doing air conditioning, and I realized it was something I was really good at. It was something that it kind of flowed for me. It seemed to work the way that it needed to. And I got so good at it and so comfortable with it. And as my confidence grew and as I continued to just develop that skill set, I became more and more eager to get better at it, but also to possibly own my own business. Like the career path really shaped up for me when I was in my early 20s. I was looking at saying, okay, do I go back to school and become a school teacher, which is what I wanted to do, or do I follow this career path? And just everything pointed to becoming a contractor and owning a business one day.
Wow, that's a big difference, right? Education versus the contractor, one of the trades, right? In essence, right? Was that a tough decision, or?
I think it was. Everything points towards, hey, go back to school, get a degree, find a job, right? There was not a lot of input at the time for me that said, hey, follow this path and create a job for yourself, or create a business or a space for yourself.
Which is crazy, because we could go down a rabbit hole of that, of like the trades. There's such now it's my understanding that there's a shortage on high level professionals that are engaged in the trades. It's like we used to have a trade, we would go down a trade and you have this beautiful career path. Now it's like this college thing emerged, and now it's like this next step, and there's all this debt, and you don't even know what you're going to go to school for, right? It's just like, just get a degree and then you'll figure it out afterwards. And I've got a couple buddies of mine that have gone from the trades, and they do extremely well. And it's like this need for young professional talent to come into the trades. It's like a blue ocean of opportunity in essence, because there's just such a shortage. And it's like there's this lost art of what it means to build like this amazing, beautiful contracting business, it seems like.
Yeah, it's there's definitely a lost art in it, but I think the biggest thing is like it's getting young people understanding that there's alternatives, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's an alternative. Not everybody is built like it was not built to go to college and get a 4-year degree and then be swimming in debt, because that's essentially where we're at. Like college wasn't paid for, wasn't on scholarship. I was going to be swimming in debt by the time I was done with it.
Right.
And so
to be a school teacher, it makes it tough financially to make that connect. Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been rough to pay those debt back. But I think that everything we're programmed with growing up essentially said, go back to school, get a degree, become a public servant.
Right.
And I think that was in my heart. Like serving people, helping people was deep down inside what I wanted to do. My dad did it for years. He was a school teacher for 30 years here in Orange County.
Oh, wow.
And so that was very motivating for me to kind of give back to my community and be a part of it.
Yep.
And I just, contracting and being an air conditioning technician and then a contractor was just, I could not figure out how to connect the two.
That's cool.
And it took some time.
Yeah.
Once I started helping people, it really encouraged me to go out and find more people to help. And I think that was a very motivating factor, along with being good at it.
Nice.
The trades, though, I mean, the opportunity for a young person now that's either going to get an associate's degree or even get a bachelor's degree and then go into being a plumber, an electrician, or an air conditioning contractor, or a general contractor, or someone who builds pools for a living. The sky's the limit. You can go from having just enough education but getting really good at it to being able to create a multi-million-dollar business.
Right.
If you play your cards right, if you start from the beginning.
Yeah.
There's a lot of opportunity there, and I think that there's not a lot of information. I don't think there's a lot of people out there encouraging people to do that.
Yeah. That's my perception. It's just that that's not some of the most affluent people I know own really successful contracting businesses, but it just doesn't seem like society puts this good pressure on going into a trade almost. It's interesting.
I think there's a lot of misconceptions about it, specifically with like what type of person. It's more about the type of person you are versus from your emotional and your mental attributes versus your physical attributes. Most of us view contractors as these big burly men, that walk around with these tool belts on, but like,
right.
I'm 5'9", was 130 pounds soaking wet when I started. I'm not a big burly man. I'm not this big, beast of a person. Like there's a misconception of what it takes to be able to do it.
So let's talk about that. So what are some of those? If I'm, because there's some great people in the community in regards to just different professions, and I think some people kind of teeter back and forth on career different changes, and am I doing the right thing? Am I where I should be? Am I where I want to be? What would that look like? What are some attributes that maybe made that you said you got really good at it early on? What are some attributes of your personality that just made that mesh really well?
Always seeking information, always seeking data, like trying not to jump to conclusions. I tend to be a very patient person. I tend to try to think through things as much as I can. So when I see a problem, I don't just always assume that I know the answer. even if I probably do know the answer to begin with. You know, I mean,
so you're investigating it, yeah.
Right. Yeah, there's a certain skill set that goes into organizing your thoughts and organizing the way you go about doing things. So I teach a specific method in troubleshooting and a specific method in gathering information. So it's a hard system. It's a way to be able to put that data together that I've developed over time. It's also that's been taught to me over time.
So it's in essence you have a framework for problem solving that you use in your craft. But
Exactly.
that skill set is probably applicable in all contracting, right? Because it's the problems that you don't know that are the real issues, right? It's the surprises that are challenges. I mean,
the other thing is like with on that note, the other thing is we have to look at building blueprints. We have to interpret drawings. We have to interpret information that's being provided to us.
Got it.
Either in traditional contracting or in more of a problem-solving space. So the way that we process that information, the way that we organize those thoughts, the way that we put it together for maybe an estimate or a bid, or we're building a scope of work for someone, it's a very systematic approach. Like you have to have a system. You have to be able to go through and organize it in a way that it makes sense.
That's cool.
In a way that you could pass that information off to somebody else to interpret as well.
That's cool. That's great. Yeah, I mean, because you could have 3 different people bid a project, but one. You could bid yourself out of work, probably, right? I mean,
I've done that. Oh my gosh, that's overthinking will kill you sometimes too.
Yeah.
You make this problem that's this big become this big because you're like, I don't have everything I need. So
in the insurance business, we would say you don't want to sell yourself out of business. In essence, if your cost of acquisition is too high, in essence, if you having a high sales velocity will put you out of business. It just sucks so much cash. But I would assume, and I'm probably not right to assume, but I'm asking, bidding these projects and having a good gear on problem solving of what it's going to take, you could bid yourself out of business. In essence, you get stuck with 3 or 4 projects that you didn't, think about what it was going to take to solve the issue, or uncovered all these different things, and that could be a big problem.
Yeah. It does, and there's times that we bid work that we don't necessarily should bid. Maybe the company, like a skill set or a price point that we're offering bids, we're offering solutions to people that we probably shouldn't. So I had a guy that I worked for one time, and I won this huge project. It was like, I don't know, $750,000 worth of work at a hospital. And he came to me and he looked at me and he goes, "Okay, what'd you miss?" That was the first thing he said to me. Like we looked at this, we were well suited. I didn't miss anything, but like that was the first thing out of his mouth. He's like, "This is a massive project. I didn't think that we were going to get it. I didn't think it was going to come our way. You had to have missed something." He was looking for a reason. And I think as a contractor, that's always in the back of our mind.
Yeah.
When we get a big job, we're like, okay, what did I miss? What did I omit? What happened here? And that's where some of those systems and that the way that we process data really provide some mental relief as well.
So important.
Yeah.
So important. So let's do that. So let's dive into maybe your quest as from make a decision that the trades is where I'm going to plant my flag. I've got some skill sets from a personality standpoint that really fit really well with this, job path and this job and the career path that you picked. And now this idea of, okay, I want to transition into this entrepreneurial aspect of what I'm good at. We've had a lot of conversations. We're in my house, which is awesome. It's very informal, but we've had a lot of conversations offline about this transition from going from employee to entrepreneur. And although you know your trade and your craft very well, it's almost like it's not starting over, but it's almost learning a completely new way of looking at the business per se. So what are some things that, number one, that you underestimated? Were some things that that have been a big part of this transition? And then what are some things that you've kind of gravitated to help you make that transition from a mindset standpoint?
So I got my contractor's license back in 2008. So I've had it for a while, and we didn't open Powell Mechanical Services until the beginning of 2020. So there was a 12-year gap there of me going, okay, I had this license and I could jump in and do this business for myself, but I don't know what I'm doing yet, right? You don't understand the liabilities, you don't understand the financial aspects of what you're getting into. and the type of work that we wanted to do and the way that we wanted to operate a business, I knew that I was, though I had the qualifications on paper, I knew that I didn't have the education or the time, or hadn't put the effort into that. So I've always tried to work for people that were smarter than I was. I always tried to work for people that had established business, that could bring something to the table, be transparent with them, say, hey, this is an area that I want to improve on, and I want an opportunity to work on that. I was very fortunate to work for a company for about 7 years before I started Powell Mechanical, and they were great to me. Like, they were fantastic to me. They were great people. I had an opportunity to work from a lot of very smart people. So
That's awesome.
as that went, my confidence grew and grew. Like, I started believing in myself, saying, I can do this.
It's almost like that apprenticeship type situation where you find mentors, and that the real value that you're getting isn't the compensation, but the real value you're getting is the ability to work in proximity with somebody or something that has the skill sets that you're looking to acquire.
Yeah, they say like the ultimate form of flattery is imitation or emulation. So
there you go.
I think that was one thing for me. Like, I admired these people. I admired the companies that they had built. So having the opportunity to work for them and to learn from them was great. And then it was more about, after that, once I felt like I had the skill set, it was about getting in the right mindset. Mm-hmm. Like, I needed to feel confident. I needed to feel empowered. I needed to feel like I could do it, that I could conquer the world. So I started reading books, I started listening to podcasts, I started reaching out to people that I knew that had started businesses. And that probably went on about 12 months before we decided before I decided to quit that job and to go at this cold turkey.
That's awesome.
And my wife has been very influential in my life as well. She's read a lot of books, a lot of organizational things that's kind of helped us, pointed me in the right direction. And you start off with the basic stuff. You start off with books by like Ray Dalio and podcasts by Tom Bilyeu, and just stuff that's easy access, easy listening, stuff that you can kind of get in and out of. Dale Carnegie wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People. Yep. So I started there. Like, that was the first book.
And what's interesting is because those have nothing to do with the contracting business.
Yeah.
So because you knew the contracting business, you had mentors that taught you the contracting business. So you're trying to say, okay, what's the skill sets that I don't have, or that maybe I need to sharpen, which is more the operational, managerial, fiscal, running the actual business day-to-day type situation, not the craft of doing the thing, in essence, right? So you said, okay, what are those skill sets, which are probably from a macro level very applicable with any type of business that you're looking to start, right? The conversations we have, like I know a big book that we've talked about is the E-Myth,
right, yeah.
Which was I think that was a pretty impactful read. We've had a lot of cool discussions about that.
Yeah, I remember coming to you saying, hey, I think I'm going to start this business. And the first thing you did was hand me this book, and you said, you have to read this. Yeah, you have to. And so I've read it. Everybody at my company has read it.
Oh, cool.
And we've talked about making sure that we're structuring in a way that kind of aligns with that. The book that I read that you provided me was about a large portion about it was a woman who had started this business baking pies,
yeah.
right? And she was going to try to, and she had multiple locations, and it just became very convoluted. So they've actually rewritten that book multiple times for multiple different trades, and there's an HVAC one. There's one
really?
Specifically for air conditioning.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and that was published, I think it was 6 or 7 years ago. So
that's genius.
We read this one about this pie maker, and then you're like, oh, this is great, and all this stuff's perfect. And then they literally, we see this one, and we're like, oh, it's an air conditioning company. Dang it! We should have started.
Should have read that one.
So yeah, in hindsight, I mean, all the principles are the same, but just the way that they, the context in which the way they put things. Like, some of the buzzwords and keywords really resonate with me. Because I'm like, okay, I use that term all the time, right?
Yeah, and a portion of the book, probably some of you have read it, but in essence, it's talks about there's the doer, and then there's the manager, and then there's the business owner, right? There's a difference between enterprising something versus just being good at it. And then, before we turned on the camera, I think, what was it, the number one reason from a contracting standpoint, most people open up their own contracting business.
Oh, it's because they hate their boss.
They hate their boss.
Yeah.
Which probably isn't the best reason to go start a business, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's like rule number one in the book. It's like, a lot of people that start a contracting business or start a business is because they don't like the way that their company's doing something, or they hate their boss, and they're really good. So they're the talent. And what I've realized is a lot of the best entrepreneurs they're not the technicians, they're not the managers, they didn't grow up in the trade. So I knew that was going to be a disadvantage for us off the get-go. Yeah. Like I knew that with as much time I've spent mastering it. Mm-hmm. So I've kind of leaned in really hard to people and filling my mind with information of entrepreneurship and what it takes to get in that mindset and to stay there.
Yeah.
So
that's great. It's almost, and I don't know what it is about that, but I think it's one of those things where it certainly is a huge, it's one thing to know the craft, right? Like that's a big advantage. But if you let that suck you back into, you can't get out of your own way almost in essence, right? Like there's a certain level of chaos that has to exist from you not being involved, that you have to be okay with things not being exactly the best. Like, because if you stepped in and do it, it would be perfect, right? Or it would be up to a certain standard. So but the very point of like, okay, well, I can do this at a high level. If I just go do this on my own at a high level, well then, okay, that makes sense. But it's like, yeah, but now there's all these extra stuff that you have to do to run a business. And that in turn, it's like, well, now you have less freedom than you had when you had the job. You're making less money because you have overhead on top of that. And now it's like, I just started a business that I have less freedom, less money, but everything's great because I'm good at my job. It's like there's almost a level of like I have to step back and be able to allow people to grow into the work, which requires you to say, man, you know what? There's going to be some dishes that get broke. There's going to be some plates that fall, and sometimes that's tough for us to allow something to not be as good as maybe we would want it to be.
Yeah. You said to me one time, sometimes you have to step back and let the boats burn, right? And always, I keep that. I keep it with me frequently because there's times I remind myself, I'm like, all right, this is one of those things where like we're going to have to fail at. Yeah. Because if we don't, we're not going to get any better. And
that's such a good thing to talk about because I appreciate you saying that because this is what's important. That's why I want people to hear this is because like we all would love to pretend that, well, we open our company, we have this deal, or we go on this enterprise. It's like, well, no, we have this high level of standard, which we do, but then we pretend as if like, well, the balls are never going to drop. But the reality of what actually happens is, in order for you to grow, you have to allow other people to fail. You have to allow you to fail because that's the way that you learn. And it's this challenge. It's like we have to perform for the client and we have to have a certain level of standard, but we also have to have a development-driven organization that allows people to grow into this. Right. And it's like you don't recognize that the stove is hot until you get burned. If you never let somebody put their hand on the stove, it's like you never really figure out the fact that, hey man, maybe we shouldn't do that. Yeah.
Ray Dalio says you have to suffer for success, and denying someone suffering is like one of the worst things you can do. Specifically, if someone is struggling with something, like jumping right in and solving that struggle is difficult. Like we want to do it. We want to be like, I can help you. Yep. I can help you fix this. Right now we could do this, but sometimes they're not ready for that.
Right. And what a different mindset of where you're depriving them of growth. Right? Whereas like I used to feel, well, I should be the hardest worker and I should spend the most time and I should, because it's my name on the door and I have a responsibility to people and that's all true and good. But in essence, if I step in and I help them, because if I don't step in, well then I'm not a team player. Right. I'm not selfless. I'm being the typical business owner that doesn't do the work, right? And those are all cliches that I don't want to be associated with. However, when the mindset shifts to go, well, no, I'm robbing them of growth. I'm robbing them of an opportunity. I'm robbing them of a chance to get better. It's a mindset change that sometimes is very difficult. So I'd love to know, was that immediate for you or did that happen over time or was there a shift? Are you still going through that shift?
I struggle with it now. I struggle with it now. And because there's times where you also, the other part of that equation is, when someone's struggling with something and they know that you can help them, and you don't immediately jump in and help them. Sometimes that builds resentment. Sometimes it's, it gives off a sense of maybe that's beneath you, right? Especially when you own a company and somebody needs something.
Right.
So I've found a couple of different ways to kind of work through that to help, squeeze, to root out that resentment and thing. So what I do specifically with our people and with our clients is I double down on the amount of time I spend with them. I double down on the amount of stuff we do. Like, I try to start from the beginning and show them that nothing's beneath me. Like, you'd be surprised when a guy, he shows up to work, it's his first day, and his truck is clean. And the floors are vacuumed, and it smells fantastic, and it's washed, and it looks great, and you're the one who cleaned it.
Wow.
Right?
That's
because they know, hey, I'm trying to prepare your workspace and make sure that you know how much we care about you. I care about you, and how much I want this to be good for both of us. And then when they first start on a job, like I go out all the time with my boots and my tools, and I work with them for 2 or 3 days the first couple of weeks. And we always pick the worst things to do. I'm in the sun. It's beating down on me. It's brutal. And then I want to spend that time with them, but I'm also looking for an opportunity to show them, like, I screw things up all the time.
Yeah.
Right. If I have to be perfect, if everything revolves around me being the best and me driving the boat and me, managing their day, then they get a false sense of, empowerment. They get a false sense of autonomy.
That's awesome.
One of our big key values of our company is autonomy. Right? We want people to work independently. We want people to work together. We want people to make decisions. We want to empower them to make decisions. When you put too many safeguards or restrictions between somebody making a decision, they won't make it. Then they'll give you they'll bring your handbook out, they'll put it in front of you, they'll flip open the page and say, these are all the reasons that I wasn't allowed to make that decision. Right? Now, you should have a handbook. I mean, ours is like 50 pages, which is amazing, but it speaks more about, hey, if that decision's in front of you and it meets one of these core values, do it, right? So a lot of the times it's just reminding them what our core values are.
That's cool. So the time spent with them and the scope of work, and it says, okay, Brooks is in the deal and he's ready to get his hands dirty. Do you explain to them that when things come up, do you explain, hey, look, this is an opportunity to, or is it one of those things where it's innate, where you're just hoping that they make the best decision and then you can rally around afterwards and review it after it's made? Or how's that? Walk me through maybe some of those situations that come up.
It really depends on you have to know who you're hiring. You have to spend some time getting to know them and know what that personality profile looks like. So really it depends on that. I tend to hire people that are smarter than I am, that have a tremendous amount of experience, people that have been doing this for a long time. And I tend to just try to let them do their thing. I just try to let them make a decision, empower them to make a decision. Where we struggle as a company when we have people that are, I always say that there's scars on their hands because they've been slapped so many times. They've been looking to help somebody, and that boss before them was like, hey, you can't do that.
Is that normal in your trade, or is that just in general from a contracting standpoint, or you think that's just applicable in most businesses?
I think it's applicable in most businesses. Yeah. When you're in a system and you've been micromanaged quite a bit, for a lack of a better term, but you've had somebody stand and breathing over your shoulder for too long, it's hard to break those habits. You're constantly looking for, acceptance or approval. Right? That expression, it's better it's better to beg for forgiveness than to ask for permission.
Got it.
So I'm looking for people that are essentially, that don't want to beg me for permission.
They want to make decisions. They're empowered to make decisions.
Yeah. And I think that's really what we're looking for in people. It's building around people that really want to drive their own boat, really want to make the best decisions for them.
I mean, I feel like you're right. I feel like that's every business, because I know that that's still something that is a challenge where, some individuals don't want to make the call because they're afraid it's going to be wrong. And it's like, well, you got to do something, right? The worst thing is you don't do anything.
Yeah.
Or they're going to come back to you with 15 questions over and over and over again. And it's not that they want to know the answer. It's the fact that they don't want to make the decision. Because you've asked the same questions over and over again, sometimes for years. And it's like, hey, look, you know how to make this decision.
Yep.
You just you just don't want to have your name or your stamp on it. And part of that is leadership, right? To make people feel like if they make a call that wasn't quote unquote right, that they're not going to be penalized for it. Yeah. But also part of that is probably reshaping the way that people view it. As it's like, this doesn't have to be a right or wrong. It's just we have to make a call. We have to keep the ball moving forward. we are so there's really two types of contracting. There's a very highly regulated side of our business where we're looking at safety and project scopes, and it's well organized and it's well put together. And then you have the other side, which are people that are none of these things. They're taking risks all the time with their employees. They're taking risks all the time with their safety and whatever. So I want to focus in on the people that are highly organized. Yeah. Within that realm, these are people that have, these are project managers, these are tradesmen, these are decision makers, and they've earned the right to make these decisions. That's cool.
So when we're looking for people, and we're looking for people to add to our team, or we're looking for even qualifying clients, we're looking at the way that they're doing business, and we're saying, okay, which side of this coin is it? Because there's no in between. You're organized, you're proactive, you're put together, or you're not. And you're taking risks, and it's a very haphazard type of environment. So
I got a couple things that I want to hit on, and I don't want to forget. So number one, you and Tiff, your wife, have a really cool relationship, and you've been running this business together, and you have this dynamic that has been really cool, because I think a lot of people could relate. I've worked with my wife in the business when we started it originally. Yeah. There's a cool dynamic that exists there. So I want to come back to that, because that's really cool. I also want to talk about, from a financial standpoint, somebody going on their own, that's probably one of the biggest scary things, right? Number one, you're losing an income. But then number two, what's the financial scope that you need to be able to do this work? Yes, so what would be some things that people could think of? But before we do those, because those are probably my favorite ones, I really want to touch on what you said about qualifying clients. Yeah. I know we got into discussion in the community about all these different aspects about our business versus your business, and you really hit something that struck a chord with me, is just the qualification of client. And I thought about it, and I said, man, that's not only just contracting, that's applicable in everything, right? Like, it is such an important thing to make sure you're taking on. However, in the insurance business, if we take on a client that isn't qualified, we may spend our time, we may spend some resources, but it's not like this long thing, but also it's not like we're gonna have this big financial impact. For you guys, if you take on the right type of client, it could be a significant time situation, resource, and a money situation. So talk with me a little bit about, and even anybody in any business, I'd like to know from a contracting standpoint how important that is and how you do that. But also anybody that's listening to this from any of their applicable industries that they belong to, how important is that qualification period, how you do that, and how that's been really important for you guys growing the business, especially being new. Because sometimes you want to you take anything at some point, right? Like, it's easy to say, like, oh, we qualify. It's like, yeah, but when you start, sometimes you have to take jobs that you wouldn't take when you're 10 years in, right? Like, and I know you had mentioned that too in the conversation. It's like, we're all in different seasons.
It goes back to a couple of different things. Like, when we're qualifying clients, I'm looking at the last thing I'm looking at. Sorry, I stumbled through that. I'm going to start over. The last thing that I look at is how much work they have for us. Because what we realize a lot with when you're working direct to owners is there's a lot of this, carrot dangling, like, look what I have, do this for me. And
the client does.
The client does. Or they have a big portfolio of equipment or property or something, and it looks like there's lots of billable hours there. That I try to ignore that off the bat, because every client should get the same amount of respect and time as anybody else's. Like, we have this philosophy with our business where, I never end an email or phone call without thanking someone for their business. Whether we did $600 with them or $600,000 with them. Every email, every phone call, because there's one thing I don't want to be accused of, and that's not being grateful.
Wow, that's cool. Such a nugget. Such a duplicatable process. You could teach your staff. Yeah. You could teach your team. It's almost like, I feel like it's like the Chick-fil-A. Yeah. It's like my pleasure. Yeah, our pleasure. It's like it's you just go, wow, that's kind of a nice touch. But you're right. That's really cool.
Brett, I have clients that are we're going to get back on the other topic, but I have clients that are so sick of hearing me say it. Yeah. And in a good way. Like, I come in and we'll have a conversation, and before I leave, I was like, hey, and they're like, thank you for your business. I'm like, I know. I'm going to
kind of part of your brand then.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
It is. I think, humility and gratefulness is something that we lose. When we brand a company and we have all these beautiful logos and this beautiful online presence or whatever, like we lose that touch with those folks where we need to say, hey, we would not be here without you. Right? And ending every conversation, every text message, every whatever that way, if it's genuine and you're teaching your people to say it's genuine and you're hoping them realize where it's at, then it's great.
That's a cool nugget.
Yeah. It's also a qualifying thing because there's times that we have to look at ourselves and we're saying, am I saying this because it's real or it's not real? Like when I start not being grateful for a client, that's normally a key indicator that maybe they're not a good fit for us.
Got it.
So let's go back to qualifying. As someone who has been doing this for a long time, I look for people that are extremely well structured. So the first thing I do when I qualify is, what does the information that they're providing me look like? How much of this information am I going to have to gather myself? It doesn't matter how big the job is. It can be $10,000 or $1 million. If I have to do all of the legwork, that's generally a red flag, right? If they're going to spend $1 million, they've probably hired people. They've probably have a good grip on what they're doing. Like nobody just walks into $1 million decision blind. So that's a big thing. The first thing is, how much effort do I have to put in to gather the information I need to bid this? What is the the second thing we look at is the worthiness of the client, right? We use a word in contracting called privity. Are we in privity of the owner, right? Or are we in direct relation or direct contact with the owner, or is there a third party in between us? So that's the second thing that we look at.
That's a super big detail. I know even for us, like if we have to go through some sort of risk management group or some sort of consultant group, and we're trying to make decisions, but we have to have it's just like there's 3 email chains that have to happen for it just slows down the process significantly. It makes it very difficult. It's just so much friction involved. So I never thought about that, but that being one of those key pillars, it doesn't mean you won't do it. It just means that maybe that with another thing, it's almost like you're scoring.
Right.
Your qualification, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, and we do a lot of work where we're not necessarily in privity of the owner, right? But that's a key indicator. Like we need to be in privity of the owner. The other qualification thing that we look at is I will actually run depending on what the property looks like, we'll run just some general reports, right? Are there any liens against the property right now? We'll do a credit report against the company if we can get enough information on them, and just kind of pre-qualify them. That goes without saying. I'm getting better at that. That's something we've learned that we need to do. We had a client that we were proposing hundreds of thousands of dollars work with, and they had a lien against the property, and I didn't realize it. We didn't look for it. So that's one big thing. If they're not paying someone, they're definitely not going to pay you.
Interesting. Got it.
So that's generally something that we look for, and then it also the relationship between the decision makers, like the actual level of communication, the level of friendliness between these decision makers. If they seem to have a pretty good head on their shoulders and they're easy people to work with, that tends to sway it. That tends to be the last thing. There's lots of people out there that check all the boxes, but working with them is an absolute mess. They're either one of two things. They're either trying to squeeze you for every penny. There's no room. They're going to hold you to the letter of the law every single time. It's going to be this, hey, this is how it said it's going to be done, right, wrong, or indifferent. This is all we're doing. And then the other ones are the ones where they're just completely disorganized, where you're waiting. You're constantly waiting on them. Duration's a big thing as well.
Right.
We'll get into that with financial, but a lot of times in contracting, we're financing these people's jobs.
Yep.
So if they're not worthy of finance, we need to figure that out in the qualification process before we waste any time with bidding or proposing anything.
So walk me through that. So your team, whether it's the tradesmen themselves or it's a sales professional that you've hired that's field worthy, whatever it may be, you're obviously going out and you're looking to get as many opportunities as you can. And then is there a certain filter where you're like, oh, I immediately know that's not going to be our scope.
Yep.
And then you're bringing that back to the team, and then you're looking, and then you're doing all this due diligence.
Yep. So I think where we were talking about the differences between contracting and maybe some of the other industries is we try to limit how big our funnel is, right? We talk about the sales funnel, and there's been this teaching for years that we just need to fill our funnel with everything, right? And
you're trying to restrict that. I'm trying to restrict the top end of the funnel.
That's right.
Got it.
I'm looking for, I want to do work for business, I want to do work for people that are worthy. So we get calls from people all the time, just from a website or from LinkedIn or something, and they're just asking us to get involved in something. And if we don't know them and we don't know the work, like there can be a tremendous amount of time doing that. So part of it is just knowing who you're working with and keeping that funnel relatively small.
Because just even the process of going to see if they qualify and bidding the process, a big project, that takes up so much time.
I just repeated myself like 4 times there.
Yeah. Well, but
we'll go back. We're gonna go back.
But it's important. Like, if it didn't take so long to do that part of the process, it might be different. But because what percentage of the work is spent on the qualification and the bidding of the job versus the actual doing?
So that's unique to every contracting business. Right?
Okay.
It's unique to the way that they go to market. A lot of people, when you first start, you bid everything. You get on everybody's bid list. Everyone sends you a set of blueprints, or they send you a job to look at, and you run everything down. So I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they first get into contracting. They feel like they have to bid everything. Our industry's changed a lot, right? We've gone from having 20, 30 people in an office looking at, blueprints and looking at projects, no matter what type of contracting it is, to having, everything's digital now, right? So no one's filing this paperwork. Nobody's holding on to blueprints for years. It's all digital files. So there's one person's job that just went away, right? So there's an overhead piece. Hey, everything's digital. I can look at it on my computer. No one needs to file it. No one needs to look at it. No one needs to do anything with it. The second thing is a lot of that stuff, all of the measurements, all of the technology for estimating has come so far. Right. So you're able to kind of look at something, you can kind of see what the scope is relatively quick and efficient as compared to what it was before.
Where you might have to go out of the property and take your own measurements and do all that stuff. Okay.
Or you're looking at blueprints and you have them rolled out on paper, and you have a ruler and a protractor, and you're taking shorthand notes, and then all of that information's got to get uploaded to a computer. So now you're doing double the work. So that's an area where our industry's improved.
That's like us with insurance quotes. You used to have to go out to the property and take pictures of the property before you give a quote.
Yeah.
We don't have to do that anymore.
I worked for a company one time, and they had like a whole they had an entire warehouse bay just full of projects they didn't win.
Got it.
That had just gone back for decades, where they had evaluated why they didn't win or what went wrong with a bid or whatever, but they were still hanging on to these old blueprints, and no one knew whether to get rid of them or not, or what to happen. And it's just an archive of lost jobs. It's
that's funny.
Yeah.
So all right. So that's a great tip, right? So figure out what's your philosophy. How big do you want the top end of the funnel? Because in essence, if you have a bigger top end, if you have a wider scope, you're going to spend more time going through the pre-qualification stuff. Right. If you can narrow the scope of what you'll take on the front end, you're probably going to spend less time saying no to jobs, because if it fits your funnel, then more than likely we're probably going to bid this job.
Yeah. I would say that most contractors, most subcontractors, and even general contractors, they only bid a certain style of work, right? It's when you first get into business, you feel like you need to bid everything. Right. The first thing you need to do is figure out how you're going to market, right? Look at a silo. Is it institutional work, which is like education and whatnot? Is it manufacturing? Is it
niche? What's your niche?
Find that niche, stay in it.
Did you always have that niche, or did it evolve? I think a lot of people, because I know even for us, from a commercial insurance standpoint, when you start, you kind of tend to take whatever you can get,
Yeah.
And then you usually fall into a niche, and then you're like, wow, that was good, and I just did 2 of them, I did 3 of them. Okay, cool, let's just do this. Or was that something because of your past life you knew what you wanted to do?
It's something that I knew that I wanted to do. Like, we looked at it and we said, we're going to die on that hill, right? We're going to go down this road. We're going to focus on this silo. And we're going to get really good at it.
Do you think that's something that's been a big? Do you see now, looking back? Do you see that was something that was extremely beneficial?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was one of those critical parts of our market is we knew how we were going to market. Well, we didn't know necessarily how we were going to market, but we knew who we wanted to work with, what type of work we were looking at, and then what that does is that also it makes you way more efficient because I'm networking literally in like 2 groups right now. Like I spend a lot of time and energy with 2 organizations that are full of just clients, full of people who can make a decision. And I have all my time focused there versus, spreading it out and going other different directions. So I'll give you a couple of instances. I've done a lot of healthcare in my past and a lot of hospitals and same-day surgery centers and things like that. But we're not really focused on that market with Powell Mechanical Services. So like those groups that do that I've worked within for years and helped that clientele, we haven't done anything with them in 3 years. Like I've not spent any time there. Right.
Got it.
The relationships are still there, but I'm not necessarily pursuing that market right now because we're not any good at it. We've got to spend some time. That's an area of our business that we have to develop as we grow and as we get bigger.
Yeah.
What really helped us, our first job, one of our biggest jobs, so the company started in February of 2020, right before COVID. So COVID hits and everything goes out the window.
Yep.
Everything gets thrown away. Wow. You've got to pivot, you've got to fight, you've got to scratch and claw through that. I mean, everything's shut down. All of our best laid plans just went out the window. And we end up on this job at a theme park at Disney. And it started off being this little tiny job that was like $28,000. It was supposed to be like a couple of months. And it turned into like 5 months later. Wow. Like I rolled out a set of blueprints. I looked at it, an engineer had drawn a line right through the middle of this 1940s building or 60s building, right through the middle of it. And I knew in my mind this was not going to work. So we bid the job, we went out and looked at it, and here we are, on this job that started off at, $28,000 up over a couple $100,000 in work and repair and stuff like that. And by the grace of God, that got us through COVID.
Wow.
It was night works, it was nights, it was weekends, it was whatever we needed to do to meet Disney's schedule.
That's amazing.
But I knew at that point that was not an area that we wanted to stay in, right? So here's this huge, colossal giant that has all of these millions of dollars in construction a year, and all of these other air conditioning companies are doing it. But I knew deep down that was not going to be our client long term.
So you were doing that to get to the next step.
I was doing that to get through COVID. We were doing that to kind of get through that initial run to buy ourselves some time. I always say entrepreneurship is like you're essentially just buying time. You're just trying to figure out something, right? I have 12 questions that I've got to find answers to, right? So that Disney job allowed me to have a bunch of quiet work at night that allowed me to kind of work through those 12 questions and then backfill that,
That's a really cool answer. It's like, hey, look, yeah, you want to be niche. Yeah, you want to focus on your market. But then there's the other part of the conversation that goes, yeah, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But at least being aware of knowing that, hey, this type of work or this job or this client or whatever, I'm going to take this, but I know that I'm not going to use the work to be the excuse why I don't do the marketing on what I do want.
Right.
It's like if you said, well, I have the work, I have the, it's like, well, yeah, but that's buying me time. That's going to have a different mentality because you're like, well, then I got to make sure I'm still niching and marketing towards what the job that I do want. But I'm also being aware enough to know that, hey, I got to keep the lights on and I got to pay the bills. Like this is a good opportunity for us to bridge the gap and buy the time that you need.
Well, I think that like with most, when you start a business, right, you either have a business plan and a model and you build it out and you spend significant time putting it together, or you don't. Or you just kind of walk right into it, right? So we spent months kind of preparing for this transition and preparing for it to happen. And then it happened. And then we realized within a month or two, we were in the same boat as everybody else. Like that plan was, we're going back on those plans now. Like we've got a 50-page handbook that looks fantastic, right? Well, that all happened before we left it. We use it all the time now, but like in the moment, we were like,
doesn't matter.
We spent all this time building this handbook, and I just need to get some money in the bank.
Right.
So
yeah, it's funny. It's like your plans all sound good and great until you get on the battlefield.
Yeah.
And then you got to be able to be nimble and move and. You can always come back to the plan.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that it goes out the window, but sometimes it's one foot in front of the other. Well, let's talk about that for a second because you and Tiffany, your wife, have a really cool relationship in regard to how you approach the business. I won't steal your thunder, but I'd like to talk about that, how that's been so impactful, working with your spouse, because a lot of businesses end up starting that way or transition that way, and then I also want to spend some time talking about the financial part in regards to just from a trades perspective, what was really important to you guys to be able to have the means and be able to have the availability of capital to be able to do what you wanted to do, and essentially leaving a good career to start from the start and be able to have the capacity to do that.
Buddy, it's been fun. So, Powell Mechanical Services, we're owned by myself and my wife, and then we have another family, the Turzis, that own part of the company as well. And Frank runs all of our day-to-day operations. He's our COO. He runs all of our daily stuff. Without him, I always say that you have to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you and work hard and that you respect. I've known Frank for almost 20 years, and I love the man. Without him, we wouldn't be here. So I'm very grateful for him. So I want to put that in there before, I transition to me and Tiffany. He's so important to our organization.
That's awesome. So he does from on the road, seeing clients, from an operation. So executing the work.
Right.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, great.
So he does a lot of the work execution. He makes all those decisions when it comes to that.
So it's a 3 trio in essence.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's or tripod, right?
Tripod. So, yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So he runs the operational stuff. Tiffany manages a lot of the financial aspects of it. We try to keep her out of the day to day because you get caught up in the day to day, you have no idea you're going broke, right? So now I get constant reminders, emails, we're going broke. Yeah. And then I manage all the executive stuff and then all of the sales. And then we have teams that work for us and people that work for us, but it really comes down to that. Without him, operationally, I would be in too many places at once.
Got it.
He is, using the word right-hand man is the wrong way to put it. I am his right-hand man. He is the one he's the motor that drives us, when it comes to our product. So
that's cool.
To transition to Tiffany and I, so we talked about earlier where I was struggling through college. I had just started and I was struggling and I was looking at a mountain of student debt. I met my wife and she was in college, and Tiffany was at University of South Florida, and she ended up transferring to UCF. And she got a degree in accounting from UCF. She got a degree in finance from UCF. And then, luckily we were able to send her back to get her master's in business administration. So, I lean on her heavily. Yeah. Our life changed in 2016. We got pregnant, had a beautiful baby boy that we're very grateful with. And Tiffany was making 6 figures a year working for an accounting firm. And we made the decision then for her not to go back to work.
Oh, wow.
We said, hey, stay home. This is what was most important to her. She said, hey, this child and our life is the most important thing. We don't need the money right now. We're fine. We're comfortable. We can be small, right? So we had a house that was 4 bedroom and 3 bath and 2-car garage and a swimming pool, and it was just the 2 of us. And every corner of our house had something in it. We were living this it's not minimalism, it's maximalism. We were living this maximum lifestyle. And we both kind of read books on minimalism, and we said, hey, this seems like the way we want to go in. So it all started with having a child and realizing that, there needed to be some housekeeping items within our own house.
That's interesting.
So we moved into a smaller footprint. We downsized. We looked at what we owned and really went through some qualifying stuff. I could talk about that for hours, right? How painstaking that is.
That's amazing.
But we did that, and we started to live smaller, and we started to live under our means, which was a huge thing.
That's a nugget right there, right? And was that before was that because that you wanted to make this transition, or was that just that just made the most sense for you guys? Is it because of she wanted to be home, or was it all of it?
It was because as parents we were scared out of our minds, right? You're like,
got it.
We have this little baby we have to take care of now, yeah. So all of these excesses have to just go away, right? Their future, everything shifts, right? Their education, all the things that we wanted to provide this child, that shifted. So I think that was the big motivating factor. So Tiffany's instrumental in we're having these conversations as a unit. We've been married to be 18 years in January. So we're having this conversation after we've been married for almost 11 years about how our lifestyle has to change. Wasn't quite sure why we're having this conversation. I always assumed it was because of our son, right? It's because of, this is the life that she wants to provide to him. So we made some sacrifices. We downsized. We put a lot more money in our bank. We sold our house, put all that money in the bank. And then something happened. My wife, who is just this, self-educated, hardworking, individual, starts to listen to entrepreneurship podcasts, and she starts to read books, and we start to have conversations about, what our life looks like in the next 10 years. And at first it was like, well, honey, we just minimalized our house, and and we had to give up all this stuff, and and now it's like, now we're talking about taking all of that money that we just that liquidity and just putting it at risk.
Yep.
And it was something at first I couldn't wrap my mind around. Because we have these, when you go into entrepreneurship, you're at risk. You're financially at risk. You're either taking money from someone else, or you're borrowing money from someone else,
or you're borrowing it from yourself.
Self-funding, exactly. So we'll get into that later. But so this dynamic between us changed from being these two independent people. Tiffany's got these great degrees and had a fantastic job, and I'm running these circles of people, and to now having to collaborate, not only as parents. And what we realized is that we were really bad at it. We were so bad at collaborating. We were like, we had this beautiful marriage, and then here's our son, right? So always always smile about that. I mean, it's the transition and the growth that happened over the last 6 years with our child, and the person that I've had to grow into has been this wonderful change, but it's painstaking sometimes. So anyway, Tiffany starts to, we start talking about owning a business together. We talked about maybe buying someone else's business. I didn't really think, okay, here I am, naive, with a contracting license for years, with the ability to be able to start a business, but it never really occurred to me that that's really what she wanted to do. She is she's got my brain on lock. She's got it all figured out. She knows exactly how to motivate me.
So that was a big thing for her. She wanted to do this. She wanted to start this business.
I think so.
That's cool.
She wanted to start a business,
Yep.
but I was reluctant to do air conditioning.
Got it.
So,
which is what you knew and what you were good at, what you were performing at a high level. But even then, you're like, okay, yeah, but what about other businesses? Because I don't know if I want to do. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I just felt like we had this good thing. Why put it at risk?
Got it.
Right.
You were meaning
scared.
Meaning, let's do something in addition.
Right.
Not, okay, got it. But, which in essence is like, okay, then there's less risk there.
Right.
So,
well, you think there is.
Right.
You think there is. But yes, I would agree.
Cool.
So we kind of went through that. So the dynamic between the two of us changed. She went from, being someone who was working, 50, 60 hours a week as an accountant and just grinding it out, to having all this free time. Not free time, but as a parent, you don't have free time, but having a lot of time to read and having a lot of time to kind of,
study,
follow your own path, right? Watching that really inspired me. Watching her, not only stop this job and being comfortable in this mindset as a parent, but also watching her not stop working. I am so inspired by her every day, man. I get up and I'm like, man, this woman just grinds every day. She has so much grit and so much tenacity, and I won't have a tenth of that. She is just this powerhouse of a person. And I think that was one thing, that I identified early in our relationship, and I think it's something that we respect in each other.
That's cool.
So we realized that we wanted to start a business. As time progressed, we realized that we wanted to start an air conditioning business. But we also realized that we couldn't work together. We could not collaborate, right? Okay. So I knew that if we couldn't collaborate and we couldn't get that fixed, it wasn't going to work. So we went out and we looked for some help. We found a counselor that was, so we meet with this counselor, and the first thing she says is, what's wrong with your marriage? We're like, no, nothing, it's great. We have this beautiful marriage and we're very grateful for it. We just know we stink at this one thing. Can you help us? So we went through a couple of counselors at first, just interviewing them.
That's awesome.
And we found the right one that helped us with our skill sets and our tools.
Wow.
So I think that's a huge thing.
That's
right?
amazing, man.
Oh, it was painstaking.
And it was just because maybe you guys approached every problem very differently. and necessarily wasn't a lot of compromise there? Was it just because it's two different ideologies when it came to business? Was it because you had the skills in the trade and she had the skills in the all the education business wise stuff, and it just wasn't gelling? What was kind of the meat there?
It was mostly like the way that we were communicating with each other.
Got it.
It came down to like our communication skills were really poor.
Got it. So it had nothing to do with that. It just had to do with just being able to collaborate and communicate something on a matter that you may have a different opinion on.
Right. I think that there's a lot of inherent skill set that people miss growing up. You know, the way to identify emotion and feeling, and you know, we have this like tendency to compartmentalize things and to bury it, right? But then when you want to collaborate with somebody and you want to build a life with them, like, you know, we've been doing that, but now we want to build this business together and this life and this business together. And we realized that we were compartmentalizing a lot of things.
That's amazing.
And we had to get it out in the open, but to figure out how to collaborate. We're still working on it. Like, it's been, you know, 3 years of this. Like, we're definitely employ the skills that we've learned. We go through it. And that process has made me so much more grateful and thankful for her.
Man, that's so cool. I appreciate you sharing that, especially on camera, to know that, like,
Yeah,
because
man.
I have 2 partners, and shit, man, I feel like we have a great relationship, but man, I mean, there's stuff that comes up that we don't always communicate the best, and you boil it down to whatever you want, but it comes down to just respecting the other person and their opinion and the ability to be able to navigate in a space that maybe you just have a completely different perspective, and knowing when to give and when to push, and knowing when to, you know, that might not be the hill that you want to die on, and you know, when should you just raise the red flag or raise the white flag, even though you know that maybe you don't feel. Sometimes I've you know, it's knowing that you might lose the decision, not get the, even though you believe that you're, you know, you have the right strategy, but knowing that like the relationship and the communication between partners is more important than the actual thing you're actually having a conversation about.
Right. So I always coin our partners, Frank and Christy Terizzi. Frank's Sicilian, so you know they've been married for a long time. And Frank was like, you know, I'm from Sicily. We don't believe in divorce. We believe in disappearance. So I'm always like, you know, back of my mind of like, I need plausible deniability when you say this stuff.
Right.
But it's finding people like that as well. Like my wife is not in that essence, but my wife is so committed to our relationship. Like she doesn't quit. She doesn't give up. You know, I mean, I want to say this because I love her. Tiffany, I love you to death. But like, she's the most unathletic person I've ever met, and I love her. And her last year at UCF, she was in a nutrition class, and they told them, "Hey, listen, you sign up for this class, you're going to run a half marathon by the time the thing's over." So she's finishing up her degree, and she's I mean, just like a lot of college students, she's overweight, she's miserable, she's, you know, whatever, and she gets herself in half marathon shape.
Wow. And
so she tells me this, and she says, "I'm going to run a half marathon in I don't know, 4 months," and I laughed at her. And she lets me remember that to the day. But she did it. And then she turned around and she's like, "I'm going to run a marathon." A couple of months later, she ran a marathon.
Oh, wow.
And then about 9 months later, she did a triathlon. She did a half Ironman, which is a lot.
Dang.
It's like a 2-mile swim. It's 56 miles on a bike and then a 13-mile run.
Wow.
Like it took her 8 hours.
Good for her.
Yeah, she just does not quit. She just does not. I mean, that amount of energy that she put into that, I get that every day from her.
That's cool.
And I'm so grateful for it.
That's cool.
That's the other thing. I'm a broken record with her, man. I look at her all the time and I'm like, "I'm so grateful for you." And she's like, "Could you just stop saying that?" But I won't.
Yeah. Man, man, that's cool to that communication, and you guys obviously worked on that, which is amazing. That's why I bring that up, because sometimes working with your spouse, it's challenging, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's a very different dynamic than when you're at home, and then it's in the workplace, and being able to marry those two together, no pun intended, is a challenge for not only, you know, it's a challenge for most people. So to hear that you guys, you know, went and found tools to be able to do that and be able to have more success in the business is really cool. I think a lot of people could relate to that. So I didn't know that, and I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah. Well, lastly, I'll ask you this in regards to, you know, downsizing, right? Shrinking your footprint, getting ready to take on that leap of faith. But was there anything from a strategic standpoint when you said, okay, we're not going to start this extra bit, we're going to start this side business and keep my gig, we're going to go all in with what I know how to do. what would be some advice that you would give some people just from a startup standpoint, from making sure that you're financially able to do that, and also from a day-to-day standpoint, what are some things that you guys do to stay on track to make sure that you're keeping the health of the business, in essence, the goose that lays the eggs, healthy?
So a lot of key stuff, but number one, self-fund everything you can. Like save as much money as you can, use your own money as much as you can, right? There's always, like, money's not free, it doesn't grow on trees, there's always strings attached. You've got to self-fund everything. So that's the first thing. When we started our business, we were primarily, between the Turizzi's and us, we were self-funded. We didn't get a bank loan. Nobody was writing loans in the middle of COVID.
Right.
There was no way for us to go out and get a line of credit. We'd established ourselves with a bank for years, and so we had a credit card that had a high limit. That's how we got it, and everything else was self-funded. Right? So that's the first thing. Self-fund as much as you can. Don't take money from people. There's always strings attached. The second thing is, don't let anybody come between you and your money. Like that is just business 101. Like, the more people that are between you and that check, the less likelihood you're going to get it, right? So we specifically did not want, because we knew that we were going to be at risk, and I say we as in the Turizzi's and us, financially, we knew that we didn't want to do a lot of construction up front with a general contractor.
Got it.
So a general contractor, in essence of the way that our business works, is they're essentially a middleman between us and the owner of that property.
Yep.
And they play a great role, and there's a lot of general contractors out there that are fantastic to work with and are amazing people or whatever, but by design, they prevent you from getting your money directly from the owner.
Got it.
Right? So the more people and the more things that are between you and it are important.
Making sure that you pick those jobs in the beginning are really important, especially because you are funding it, right?
Right. And it goes back to that qualification thing, right? How many people are between, I say this all the time, I know it's blunt and I know it's together, but like, how many people are between us and getting paid? How many people are between us and our money? That's a big qualifying factor, right?
Is it fair to say that maybe at some point later in the cycle of the business, when there's more capital, you might take one of those jobs or take a couple of those jobs?
Absolutely, yeah.
But in the beginning, when you're self-funding and you're putting your own money, it's one of those things that's like, okay, well, we might be able to do that later on, but right now that significantly increases the risk of not getting either what we're either getting paid or getting the full amount that we're believed that we should be getting paid.
That's right, yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, so I think that we would look at some of that. I mean, we do a little bit now, but very little. Like, again, less than 10% of our revenue comes from a general contractor.
That's a good tip for somebody that says, hey, man, how do I make this happen? How do I make this deal? I mean, number one, I hear shrink your footprint.
That's right.
Get ready and make sure you have enough capital. Number two, don't think that, if you take money from other people, don't think that it doesn't come with a cost. There are strings attached to that money. And then number three, if you're going to self-fund and put your own money at risk, you probably want to put it into projects that you have a very good probability that you're going to get paid, right? And having an intermediary and a middle person between that is not necessarily helping you in regards to that risk of not getting paid.
And then I would say the other thing is, like, know your, from a construction industry, like, they have classes, they have books, they have all types of stuff on, construction lien laws and the way that we have to go about business to protect our opportunity in lien. As a contractor, we are the last people that are going to get paid, right? It's always the business owner and the property that have the leverage. So by design, there are certain protocols and stuff that we have to put in place. There's certain forms that have to get filled out. There's certain things that we have to do to make sure that our ability to maintain our leverage has to get there.
So that would be another advice you would give somebody. If you're going to go into this, you need to know that stuff.
You need to know it. You need to practice it regularly.
Wow.
If you don't know it before you start a business, figure it out, learn it, do a podcast, read a book, familiarize yourself with it, talk to people that do it. I'm meeting with a contractor called Blown Away, and I'm going to be meeting with their owner and the two owners. They have a very unique way of qualifying clients, and they have a very unique way of maintaining those lien laws. It's like, even me, someone who's done this for a long time, I need to spend time looking at the way other people do it and perfecting that craft.
That's great, because it's, in essence, that allows you to reduce your risk.
Right.
And that's what you're looking to do in the beginning, right? If you're startup, self-funded, in scaling up, the more that you can de-risk that in your favor, the more sustainability, longevity that you're going to be able to have. Because we all know, and the last I'll leave you with is there are hiccups that happen along the way. It's just not going to be perfect. There's going to be stuff that comes up that you just can't plan for. So, my dad always said you have to build margin into your life, right? Like if you are believing that you're going to operate based upon the expenses and the jobs and all of it with no margin of error, you're in a lot of trouble, right? One thing can take you out. So building that margin is going to be super important, because all these things allow you to have to live with less margin because you have less risk, because you've de-risked it. But even then, you still have to have some margin for error when things don't go right.
Yeah, Tiffany calls it an emergency fund, and that's definitely a key metric, right? You've got to know. It's great when you start a business and you start making money, and then you're like, okay, how much of this can I take?
Yep.
Right? Because we all think it. It's like, okay, we got big check. How much of this is mine? Right.
Right.
Well, you don't realize it's a lot less than what you think.
Right.
Right. Because that emergency fund has to continue to grow. It's got to be there for what happens when you have to file an insurance claim? What happens when the insurance claim doesn't cover everything?
Yep.
What happens when that like you said, that margin for error?
Margin.
Right.
Yep.
So, and that fund never gets satisfied. When you have one employee, maybe it's, round number, maybe it's $100,000. When you have two employees, is it $200,000? It has to continue to scale.
It has to scale up
as you grow.
That margin has to scale up with how much risk you're taking on, right?
That's why I like Tiffany calls it an emergency fund, but I like the margin of error, because that margin is always moving, it's evolving.
And that's what we do, right? So it's just, insurance is risk transfer. Like the more risk we can reduce for a business owner, the less margin that they have to, in essence, have, right? That emergency fund is less. If I take on all the burden of risk and I don't transfer that out, or I don't know my lien laws, or I don't not take general contracting, like there's some certain things that allow me to de-risk the situation. I have to have a bigger emergency fund as a business owner, right? But if I can do some certain things that reduce my risk, in essence, I have to have less capital sitting on the sidelines for that just in case situation. So I hear that. That's awesome to hear that, because that's a great advice for somebody to say, hey, look, there's some certain things you can do to just reduce risk that that are no financial. It's intellectual. You don't have, there's no financial impact. It's just knowing lien laws and also making sure that you can self-fund. But then, the general contracting tip. That's great. But then from a financial standpoint, you're also, if you could self-fund, you're reducing your operating expense as far as just interest payments that you're having to take on. But the elephant in the room is usually when you're self-funding, that's going to cut into your income, right?
It does.
So the last thing I would leave you with is, what has that been like, and what advice would you give somebody in regards to, I make a certain income, I want to go start this business. Do you take the same pay? Do you not take the same pay? How is that, with you guys, and what are maybe some leave behinds that you would tell somebody?
Yeah. So when we went through 2020 with COVID, there's times that you have to miss paychecks. You skip your own paychecks, right? You have to always take care of your people. Like, you have to, every paycheck to them, everything that you run into with your people, like, you have to take care of them. You have to treat them better than you treat yourself sometimes. And I think that was something that we were prepared for. Tiffany and I went from, a few years ago making, a couple $100,000 between the two of us, to getting that cut in half. And then that first year in business, we made $32,000. And I don't mind sharing that with you. Like, we had all of our money in this investment. COVID hits, and we cleared 32 grand in 1 year. And some people are like, hey, you can survive on that. We did. We survived on that, right? We got small. We stayed small. That's awesome. But that lifestyle, like, we started to teeter our lifestyle down in preparation for this. Yeah. We started to not drive brand new cars. We started to not take these wonderful trips. I've been all over Europe. I've been all over the United States and seen some beautiful places or whatever. But this gap of time that we're in right now, I don't get to do that. Yeah. Like, those are sacrifices that we make to be able to indulge in it later. Yeah. So we were prepared for that. I think that a lot of times when people have a beautiful lifestyle, and then they want to open a business for themselves, they don't realize that to maintain that lifestyle is almost impossible. Yeah. Like, in my opinion. Yeah. Right. or you're taking money from someone and there's strings attached for it later.
Or you just have an enormous amount of risk at that point. Because if you're trying to maintain a lifestyle and not get small, then in essence means you're using leverage, and leverage means you have a bigger balloon of risk. So
I don't want anyone to have leverage over us. I want the opportunity to make decisions and to pivot when we need to pivot. For my family's sake. I would say the last thing that I'll leave you with is have a plan B. Like, we all know, everything we've read, all the statistics say that a lot of businesses fail. Like, a lot of them fail, right? Have a plan B. Like, Tiffany and I have talked about what happens if this doesn't work, we end up broke and bankrupt and we have to go to work for somebody else. Is that the end of the world? It's not, right? We could survive. We could, to be honest with you, we'd probably close this business and go back to work for other people, right? And make all these other sacrifices in our life, but we'd make more money, right? That's not what we want. We want to live this lifestyle. We want to spend that time with our kids, spend that time helping and enriching people's lives. And the sacrifice is the money.
Well, that's a conversation of like, am I okay with the downside? What if this doesn't work out? I love have a plan A and screw the plan B, but in practicality, from a risk standpoint, you go, what is the worst case scenario and can I handle it?
Yeah.
Right. And so I hear that as to say, if that's the worst thing that could happen, okay, so what? Okay, so what? And it's like, once you can go there, and it's sometimes I think the fear of what that looks like, instead of defining it, keeps us from doing something. But if you can go into that situation of like, what is the worst case and what does that look like? And you can live there for a second and then acknowledge with your spouse to say, well, I guess that's not terrible. I mean, if that's the worst case scenario, like, that's okay. We're not, it's not like we're homeless and on death's door. I have a craft. We're both good at what we do. We go back there and we pick up where we left off, and we have some battle wounds that, and some things that we learned along the way. And I think that empowers you to be able to make those jumps.
Yeah, Tiffany said to me one time like this, and it's one of the most beautiful things she's ever said. She goes, if this doesn't work and we end up sleeping in a tent, we'll figure it out. And I was just like, yes, we will figure it out, right? Because you don't know how far they're willing to go either. I mean, what I've learned about my spouse over the years is that she'll take it to the limit. She will go, we're all in, 2 feet in, we're going for broke.
That's cool.
And it's nice having somebody, same thing with the Terizzi's. They're in it, till death do us part at this point. And I'm very grateful for them as well.
What a beautiful thing to have partners that you could say that about. So I know that this journey can be a lonely journey. And sometimes it's overwhelming, and to be able to have people that you can share that with and confide in and be in it with them is such an advantage. I know with the 2 partners that I have, I'm super grateful for that too. Sometimes just to have a glass of wine and feel sorry for yourself for 5 minutes, and then you got to dust the dirt off and go back at it. But dude, this has been great, man. I appreciate it. Thanks for letting us turn the camera on. Thanks for being in the crib. And
hopefully I didn't look too uncomfortable. I've been like,
it's perfect.
Don't touch your face and drink some water. And,
you did great, man. You did great. So usually this is a Kiki's breakfast. So this is a pleasure. So I appreciate it.
Soon.
It sounds good, man. Thanks for being on the show, man.
Thanks, brother.
See you, man.